wrong side. Oh, there we go. Exits there. I declare the meeting open. Welcome everybody. Official opening. Disclaimer, members of the public are advised that recommendations to council contained within this agenda can be subject to alteration. Applicants and other interested parties should refrain from taking any action until such time as written advice is received confirming council's decision with respect to any particular issue. Any statement or insinuation of approval regarding any planning or development application made during an ordinary council meeting is not to be taken as notice of approval from the Shire. Shire advises that anyone who has an application lodged with the Shire must obtain and should only rely on written confirmation of the outcome of the application and any conditions attached to the decision made by council regarding the application. An audio and or visual record will be made of these proceedings to assist in the taking of minutes. Acknowledgement of country. Shire of Harvey acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their cultures and to elders both past and present. That was difficult with these classes, let me tell you. Number 2, record of apologies and leave of absence.
We have received apologies from Councillor Gillett and Councillor Boylan, and Councillor Lovett has a leave of absence.
Thank you. Declaration of members and officers' personal interest. Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you. I have an impartiality interest for 5.3.1, the proposed local development plan. I have a relative who is a property owner opposite Laura Avenue, and also 5.1.2, I've declared a financial interest. I'm the Deputy Council Representative for the Bunbury-Harvey Regional Council, so I get paid an attendance fee for that, so I've declared financial interest in that one. I'm not sure whether it is a financial interest because I'm a council delegate, but
Yes, we have had advice from the Manager of Governance in regards to declaring a financial interest, and we'll note that interest.
So I'll leave the room for that item. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson?
Yes, 5.1.2. I am the council delegate on that Harvey Regional Council. So what interest am I declaring?
Councillor Dickinson brought it to our attention that there's a payment that you receive for sitting on that committee.
There is a meeting fee.
Yeah, and therefore it would be a financial interest.
So I declare a financial interest, and I will leave the chamber when we deal with that item.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I declare an impartiality interest for item 5.2.1, the proposed shade shelter. I'm the council delegate on the Morrissey Homestead Board. I'll remain in the chamber and judge the item on its merits.
Thank you.
No.
Further? No. Okay. Deputations, do we have any? No. No. Quick, I need to do one. 5.1.1. CEO.
I'll pass through to the
Pass
Manager
over.
of Governance, thank you.
Through the Chair. In March 2020, the Shire of Harvey undertook an architectural inspection which highlighted a number of issues with the Harvey Administration Building. That was sort of highlighted again with a motion put forward for the CEO to provide and it will engage an consultant to undertake an immediate occupational health and safety assessment of the Shire of Harvey offices located in Harvey. In looking at the architectural report and the requirements to deliver a report on the health and safety of the employees in that building, We ended up engaging 3 consultants to undertake the assessment due to the complexity and diverse nature of the issues highlighted in the report. In the report is the scope of works for each of the assessments which were undertaken. There were several attachments attached to the report, one which looked at the building, one that looked at the environmental assessment, and then another engineering report, mechanical, electric and hydraulic. What we generally found was that the environmental assessment met Australian standards, although some were pretty close to not meeting those standards. In terms of the building report, there were issues in relation to accessibility, building compliance and some structural damage which is recommended for repair. The engineering report highlighted issues typically with the compliance of electrical systems, switchboards, for example, being near the end of life. Water egress into the roof was highlighted as an issue, as some of the services in the roof are not rated for wet conditions and present a risk. Over to the expected expenditure to fix these issues. The total cost of building works was calculated at $70,000 in the first year. That's detailed in the spreadsheet in front of you, and we can break that down between the office and the community hall, which is a question that I had from a councillor as well. If we were to do that, the costings would be $17,000 in the first year and approximately $90,000 in year 1 to 3. I would need to seek further advice in terms of doing that though, as the infrastructure is connected, and so certain parts of the infrastructure can't be necessarily separated in terms of what we'd fix. So I'd need more advice in terms of that. Yeah, that basically sums up some of the issues. As I said, there's lots of detail in the attachments. If there's any questions relating to any of it, I'll do my best to answer. I've also got the Special Projects Officer in the building as well to help me if I get a bit stuck.
Okay, that's taken care of one question. There are further questions? Councillor Beach?
Yeah, Courtney referred to the question I sent in, and the reason I asked the question, if it could be clarified, if we could split the town hall away from the admin building. I understand there is some interfaces there, but the town hall is likely to be there forever, and going forward it may be that the admin centre is only there for 1 to 3 or 4, whatever it is, whatever the lead time is. So I guess the question's leading into, we wouldn't want to be spending a whole heap of money on the admin building, but we certainly want to look after the heritage building being the town hall. So that was the premise of the question that I raised with you. And the other part of that question was, it refers to defect, capex and maintenance. I know what defect is, I know what maintenance is, I don't know what capex means. Could we have an explanation, please?
Sure, and through the chair. So actually in the OBARN attachment, which was the building maintenance inspection, there were a list of definitions at the back.
Oh, okay. Well,
but I'll read them anyway. So maintenance works to be undertaken are to maintain the element operating as intended. Typical examples include repainting external doors, for example. CAPEX, which is capital expenditure, are works which are an upgrade of the existing element to provide an improved or replacement item whilst the existing element is still functional.
Yeah, thanks very much.
That's okay. And I'll just further clarify in terms of separating out the budgets. So in the spreadsheet we can sort of see what needs to be done over the 10-year course, and I imagine that the buildings, and correct me if I'm wrong, might be able to be split up in terms of the budget when we do our budgeting at the end of the year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Bronwyn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, I guess. Through you, just the critical elements in relation to what we have to achieve in relation to occupational health and safety for staff. Is there a list of just the critical elements we need to achieve?
So the critical elements are listed in year 0 to 1. So the detail is from the spreadsheet is further highlighted in the reports, but basically where it says 0 to 1 are the immediate issues that sort of can't be prolonged any longer than that. Examples are RCDs on light switches, maintenance on switchboards and those sorts of things. I can send through the Excel spreadsheet to councillors and then you can filter out more specifically. It's a little bit harder to do it in paper form, but certainly 0 to 1 are the other things that need to be done in the first year just to meet compliance requirements.
That'd be great, thanks very much.
Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Mr Chair. I think this initiated from the idea that there was overcrowding in the office space, and one of the options was to actually move staff into the council chambers. So, and I gather from the report that they didn't identify that overcrowding was an issue. I suppose I'll direct this to the CEO. Do you still feel that there is an overcrowding issue, or do you think that you can manage that now that you've got some guidance here and utilise the space a bit better for staff?
Although the report may not have highlighted overcrowding issues, I would say that the way that the offices are structured doesn't allow for maximum productivity. In relation to having available desk space for additional staff, there is none in both of the offices. So in regards to hiring or recruiting additional staff over the period of time that it will take for facilities to be constructed, we'll run into issues there. So yeah, we are at a critical juncture in regards to productivity and also being able to service ratepayers through the recruitment of staff for service delivery.
I guess overcrowding wouldn't be a criteria that necessarily be looking at it in that report either, would it?
So the way that we looked at that was in terms of the indoor environmental assessment, which sort of had various tests in there, how much carbon dioxide's in the room. So from people breathing, they assessed, distances between staff and those sorts of things, and they all were to the Australian standards. Some were quite close, so I'd imagine if you added more people in, we'd probably step outside of what would be considered reasonable.
So just to follow on, if I may, are you therefore going to look at alternate office space to accommodate expansion in the workforce in the short term, or how do you propose to manage it? Not that I want to get into the operational side, but
really not. At this stage, we'll really need to look at workforce plan projections, look at whether more desks can go into existing offices, more sharing of spaces, and the other buildings that we have in the Shire in regards to whether people can be located in those offices as well. But yeah, it's not optimal when you're splitting staff, but yeah, we'll just have to work around it. If need be, there may be the need to bring in temporary accommodation onto site, either here in Australind or in Harvey, so it will be something that we'll monitor and judge through that workforce plan.
Thank you.
Councillor Bond.
Thank you. I guess my question would be to Courtney, actually, run the program. Did they take into consideration in the space around people privacy, psychological effects, and movement and stand up for exercise, and sort of to relieve the issues in relation to sitting for long periods of time, and that result from cancer and so on from this stuff?
Through the chair, we use the Australian standards as a baseline just in terms of what's acceptable. I suppose the report didn't go into that level. We were really just looking at the baseline of what's safe and what's not. There are some psychological sort of assessments in terms of lighting and spacing in the engineering report. Typically, I think was in electrical. Apart from that, there were some further comments just with regard to the internal structures in the hallways being firm barriers, but as that's something that wouldn't be needing to be immediately addressed in the next 1 to 3 years, it wasn't really considered. Yeah.
Thank you.
Exhausted that one? Okay. 5.1.2.
This report's quite self-explanatory. Councillor Adams, oh sorry, thank you. Councillor Dickinson and Councillor Jackson.
Oh, apologies.
I received notification that Councillor Adams had resigned from his position at Bunbury Harvey Regional Council. Currently we did have two councillor reps and also one proxy. With Councillor Adams resigning his position, we have a report to appoint a councillor to the Bunbury Harvey Regional Council. To date I've received 2 nominations for that position. And there may be the requirement to also appoint a deputy if Councillor Dickinson is appointed as the delegate. So that recommendation may change based on if Councillor Dickinson is appointed, and so that we ensure that we have a proxy at all times in regards to that council position.
Any questions? Councillors back.
One of the
Who's the young one? Hayden?
Thanks, Elaine.
One that's actually listening.
Perfect.
CEO's presenting this week.
Yes, thanks very much. Presenting for adoption at the council meeting next week, the Communications and Engagement Plan, which is a 5-year plan to guide the Shire's communications into the future. This plan was developed on the back of a notice of motion from Councillor Bromham in regards to developing a Facebook page for the Shire. And in June 2020, an alternative motion was put up to develop a communication strategy so that the use of social media could be considered. Following funding provided in the 2021 budget, we went out for a request for quotation and were able to secure the services of Creative ADM to work with the Shire on developing that communication strategy. A working group was developed which included councillors and also internal staff members, and they fed back into the process, and a number of workshops were held with Creative ADM which developed some of the outcomes that were required as part of the strategy. We were also fortunate in regards to the feedback that we received from the Market Community Scorecard, because that fed some engagement and views into the development of the strategy. The strategy has since been called a Communication and Engagement Plan, and it nominates a number of online and offline channels to promote the Shire and its communications and the Shire as a region, and has a number of outcomes that will be reported on an ongoing basis to measure the level of effectiveness of that communication. So I'd like to thank Chloe Moore, who is our Marketing and Communications Officer, in regards to the work that she has put in with Creative ADM in developing this plan, and also to the working group as well. I think it was a really valuable process, and it is presented to Council for adoption.
Questions? Councillor
just a real simple one. Some of the terminology we use in it is we refer to Harvey region as opposed to the Shire of Harvey. The Shire of Harvey terminology is used throughout most of the document, but we do refer to Harvey region. So I was just wondering why we would do that and not use Shire of Harvey consistently throughout the document, because I feel referring to Harvey region gives a perception that we're just talking about the Harvey area and not the Shire in its full capacity as such. So, for example, on the attachments, page 158, core measurable outcome, raise perception of the Harvey region as the place to work as opposed to using the Shire of Harvey. So, yeah, just an observation, really,
Yeah.
but...
And just as a response, it actually is deliberate to use those two terms,
Okay.
because communications relates as the Shire of Harvey to the Shire of Harvey as an organisation. Specifically on page 158, it's highlighting the Harvey region and creating and implementing a Destination Harvey communication strategy. So it's really looking at promotion of the Shire, and that's seen as the Harvey region versus the Shire of Harvey as an organisation. So I suppose that was the reasoning behind those two.
Okay.
It's a good point. My brain's just starting.
Give them a
That's
go,
all.
shall we?
Sorry. Councillor Beaves.
Thank you. Read the plan, and I have a couple of concerns, but I guess my question is, if the plan is adopted as presented, are we committed to fully implementing all of the strategies, or will we review it as we go along, say on an annual basis or prior to budget? Because I'm concerned from the presentation we had the other day of the cost of staff employment to make this achievable. There was mention of 4 staff members originally, so yeah, I'll just put that out there.
Sure. Okay, so the Communication and Engagement Plan is a 5-year plan, and along with other plans that the Shire has adopted, we don't review our plans annually. What the plan does have is a number of outcomes which can be measured on an ongoing basis to determine the effectiveness of the plan. In regards to the resourcing of the plan, it doesn't detail the resources that are required in regards to developing and on the actions, but that will be listed in the annual budget for consideration by Council as to the level of resourcing that will be provided. I suppose this is similar to the Economic Development Strategy, which has recently been adopted, in regards to the resourcing that is required to deliver on those actions that are in that strategy, and they are put into the annual budget for adoption by Council. So it's not dissimilar to this plan as well.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Jackson.
Just further to that, when we talk about resourcing and staff across multiple areas of service delivery, we wouldn't necessarily see an agenda item that said that community development would need another staff member. In this case though, where there'd be competing interests about how far we go with this engagement plan as opposed to whether we need another ranger, I would think that Council would want to see that if we want to develop that next level, that it would come as a budget item, that we might resource a 3rd officer for this area. Would that be your considered opinion of how that would be dealt with, or would you say, oh, it will be a line item in the budget where Council wouldn't necessarily be aware that we were now resourcing to 3 or 4 people in this to deliver this plan?
I suppose that's in regards to the economic development strategy, in regards to those actions, it was a report to Council in regards to what would be funded in what year to deliver on what actions. The same can be done with this communication and engagements plan. In regards to other positions that have been developed through the workforce plan, they ordinarily are included as a line item in the budget, and in regards to areas such as community development, that would be based on need, as would range of services. So as it's linked through to the plan, I would imagine, and it can be that it could be included as a council report to advise why additional resourcing was required to deliver on what actions in the plan. As mentioned previously, there is a position in the existing 2021 budget which was placed in there on the proviso that if the Shire developed a Facebook page, then that position would be required. And as such, on the adoption of this plan, it does note the use of various online channels, that it would be the intention that that position would be taken up, that is in the budget, to develop on instigating a Facebook page.
Yeah. It's at a presentation where there seem to be those stages, and I think that whilst we might think that it's all wonderful, it's a competing interest when we get to those other levels of the plan that I think as a councillor I would like to decide whether we were going to go to that level if we're going to deal with a budget. So, you know, my question is that could we do that?
I was just going to say doing might also be reactive rather than proactive. You're leaving it too late for another staff member. Councillor Ron.
Yeah, just a point of clarification on the last. I'm just wondering, where does council involvement in relation to the rolling out of adopted strategies end and operational matters begin? Because I see like this is a very fine line, and I've employed you to run the organisation, or the council is. So where does it come to where we adopt a strategy and then we want to tell you how to do your job, or I'm not really sure where that type of fits.
The role of council is to set the strategic direction for the organisation, and by adopting plans and strategies, they are doing that. The implementation of the actions is operational, but council provides the resources in order for the Shire to be able to deliver on those actions. So in regards to a budgeting and resource allocation, that's where council's role is. So yes.
Right, thanks for that clarification.
I was going to say the same thing. Okay, 5.2.1. Director Infrastructure Services.
Yeah, thanks, Acting Chair. Look, as the report's pretty self-explanatory. We've had a request. We looked at the playground. It's on Old Coast Road. It's a fenced playground due to its proximity to a busy road. There's very little shade there. Justification for supporting the shade is in the background of the report. Obviously we are developing a playground strategy at the moment, and as part of the strategy we'll be looking at shade, whether it's artificial shade, natural shade, planting of trees or whatever. We just considered that this was a worthy cause given the users, and I did identify a saving in one of my Australian projects of about $20,000, which I believe, in talking to the manager of finance, has been allowed for in the budget review. So hence the officer's recommendation. Just in response to some of the questions that came through, I'll just go through them and provide the answers. The report mentions 5 shaded playgrounds. Where are they and who funded them? Okay, there's the Settlers Hall, which was funded by the Shire, Leicester Leisure Centre by the Shire, Yarloop next to the Community Centre by the Shire. That was the shade cell that survived the fire. where everything around it burnt down. Harvey, so we probably use the same material elsewhere. Harvey Rec Centre, Shire of Harvey, and the Harvey Dam, that was funded by the Harvey Water. Another question, if it is shaded, would this not then be an attractor for other users and perhaps not be as useful as the group has suggested in the application? Yes, this is possible. At the times Morrissey used it, or often times middle of the day and times like that. Shade is an important factor in promoting safe exercise for children. The playground strategy currently under development will outline a way forward for the provision of shade on current and future playgrounds, be it natural or artificial, as I mentioned. Other proponents offering to assist with the cost? No, there's been no discussion about funding. Given that we are now moving into winter, could this matter be listed for consideration in next year's draft budget? Yes, that's a possibility. Do staff believe that other community groups could request be entitled to similar treatments to playground in the area if council were to fund this project? And look at the response there was, if other requests are received, they would be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And again, as I mentioned before, Infrastructure Services considered that this was a worthy cause and identified a saving on another Australian project.
Councillor Coleman.
Thanks, Rick. I'm aware, I think this is a great cause, but I'm also aware that there is a playground in Cookanup that's been waiting on a cover over their playground for at least 12 months. And it is a funding issue, I realise that. If we were to proceed with this one, as you've proposed, is there the opportunity to put some extra money into next year's budget to get the Cookanup playground cover done before the end of, or before the start of the coming summer?
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, look, the Cookanup one, there's $15,000 on budget to be funded by Muni funds. From Muni funds, and there's $10,000 to be funded from a grant, and that grant was to be sourced by the organisation that requested. They've actually requested a hard cover structure, not a shade sail, and that's a more expensive structure. We've had a quote of about $35,000 for that. So currently we've only got 15. So we'd have to put some more money on budget for that if no grant funding came available. And yeah, that could be listed for consideration in next year's draft budget for council to make the decision. We can carry the existing funds forward and list the additional funds for council's consideration.
Thank you, Rick, because I'm aware that there's not too many others that are requested to contribute by grant funding of their own, from their own sources as well. So in consideration of the timeline and the number of times that we've been out en masse to have a look at this place, it would be great if we could do that consideration if this one goes through and put that on budget and take the stress off them of having to raise their own grant funding for a Shire facility.
Yeah, look, and through the chair, if they, obviously if they were after a shade sale, we've probably got enough money in budget now to do it. But I believe they're adamant they want a solid structure similar to the Settlers Hall, and that's why it's going to cost more. And when it was listed on budget, it was listed by the previous community development manager. We had no, Infrastructure Service had no involvement in this one, and I don't know what discussions took place at that time in terms of why we're putting 15 in and why they were going to contribute 10.
Thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member. As has been noted, this is a very worthwhile cause, and I don't dispute that. I would just like to clarify a couple of things if I could, because my whole premise is based on the report. Could you advise, the playground strategy is currently under development. When is it anticipated that the strategy will actually be completed? Also, from my understanding, reading the report, that the Christian Street Reserve has been identified as the playground of choice by this group, based on the fact that it is fenced. Now, I'm just wondering, the cost of a fence is not huge, so, and based on the small playground area, the age of the playground equipment in there, would it not be prudent to at least wait and see what other opportunities there are that may come out of the playground strategy? Because there may actually be another playground that could be fenced that has more appropriate play equipment than just trying to dovetail into this particular playground because it's got a fence.
Yeah, through the chair, Councillor, you always come up with some very wise argument. And yeah, look, in terms of the first question about the strategy, I might just hand over to the Director of Community Lifestyle, because they've taken the lead role in developing that strategy.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor. Just straight from the minutes that we've taken on the strategy recently, it has been handed over to our Directorate just this in recent times. Consultation will be conducted throughout March and April and presented at the May Ordinary Council meeting. At current, the scope does incorporate the 37 playgrounds and 6 skate parks, and it is the intent to develop an asset management plan that Parks and Gardens can actually work towards to make those decisions, some of what you've already highlighted.
Yeah, and answering some of the other questions, yeah, just going on what the Director said. Yeah, look, that's a possibility that what you said, we could look at fencing somewhere else and whatever, whether this one's fit for purpose, whether the infrastructure is beyond its use by date and doesn't comply with Australian standard. Yeah, none of that was taken into account when I put this report together.
Somebody, Councillor Beach.
Yeah, I just want to correct the record so that we don't have to do it when the minutes come out to this meeting. The Yarloop shade sale was actually paid for through a grant that was received by the Yarloop Precinct Advisory Group from Alcoa. Alcoa made approximately $1 million available to be spent in Yarloop at the time, and it was used on various projects, the shade sale being one of them. So if you can just correct that record, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I just went off the information that was provided to me, but thanks for that.
Yep.
Councillor Jackson.
I was going to add something similar. Given the number of playgrounds, it just wasn't feasible to cover most of them when we had requests. So when we actually had user groups that leased the adjacent building, we offered to support them in their funding. So Settlers Hall might have been an example of where that funding was brought in from elsewhere. So Cooking-Up is not alone in asking for a group, and it was one way of managing it. So the ones that are connected to buildings, there's been a long history of support for those. So this one happens to not be connected to a building. I think that's what makes the difference.
Sorry, I've just reminded myself about something by mentioning Alcoa. I mean, the Cooking-Up one would probably lend itself to a submission to the Alcoa Sustainability Fund if they had some matching funding, I'm not sure.
That's where it got from.
Yeah. So there is leverage if they've got some funding.
Nothing further? 5.2.2.
Thanks.
Postcode.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've also got Mr. Jones in the gallery there if council start asking some curly questions. But basically, as the report suggests, it's a requirement from the Department of Water and Environment regulations for landfill sites to have a closure and post-closure management plan. As you all know, the Richardson Road landfill site started off as a hole in the ground that was gradually filled with uncontrolled landfill over a number of years, and it's reaching the end of its life, and basically no more new landfills are being approved on the coastal plain. The existing ones that are in the coastal plain need to be lined, and leachates and methane capture and need to be managed. So this is one that is basically nearing the end of its life, and the requirement was to prepare a closure and post-closure plan. So the report just talks about some of the things that are included in the plan that was prepared by a consultant, GHD, who are quite experienced with landfill sites and closure plans and lining and whatnot. So they've prepared a report in accordance with requirements, and that now the officers will use that report to move forward in terms of what we do with the 7.5 hectare site as a staged rehabilitation, and so this gives us a roadmap to move forward in terms of converting that site to a transfer station, rehabilitating some areas and covering it. So we've got a plan now, whereas before we didn't. In the consultant's report, they've prepared some costings. They're talking about $4.1 million, but in discussions with Mr. Jones, they've also allowed a $1 million contingency in that estimate. So we'll be working on that to see where the priority areas are, what we can change, what we can do better in terms of what they've suggested. And also the transfer station is another component that some of the councillors were discussing before, in terms of, you know, make sure it's safe and functional and fit for purpose. There are transfer stations in the metro area, Balcatta Transfer Station, the Mandara Regional Council have got one, the Eastern Metropolitan Regional Council. They're all quite large operations that cater for a large catchment. We would have to tailor ours to suit our community in terms of the diverse waste that comes in there from the rural areas, urban areas. So yeah, I think it's interesting times ahead, and this gives us some direction moving forward. So the recommendation is that Council adopts the plan.
Questions? Councillor Long.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. My question is in relation to the likelihood of the water table being contaminated, and I noticed in the report it talks about vertical movement of water through the body of the tip, and I just wondered about our bore depth, and does it actually capture the any contamination, and what depth will be capturing that, and obviously is the direction at different levels flowing the same direction?
Might hand over to Mr. Jones, through the chair.
Yeah,
Mr. Jones. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Yeah, good to see you, Mr. Chairman. Look, probably it's a very complex question. It's quite a unique site, Richardson Road, because of its proximity and the geological formation there. In that area there's a lot of perchlorate tables and clay lenses, and there's also, within the hydrology report that was done for the site, I think maybe in 2013, it showed that the water moving across the site goes in multiple directions. So as part of that sort of hydrological report, we had to put in some additional groundwater monitoring goals. So as part of the process, and I think even the recommendation within the report is talking about doing more groundwater monitoring, and as part of our commitment is having these sites is we will have to monitor the groundwater contamination or potential contamination into the future as part of our responsibility. Now, as part of the consultants have been doing the groundwater sampling for us for a number of years, we've got to do biannual sampling, which includes organics and also a lot of other biological and chemical analysis on the site. The results that we received have showed that it is a low risk landfill, and the contamination that would potentially get into the groundwater is quite low. But it's very hard because the water there and the groundwater level is quite high, and it's very brackish, affected by the coffee white rock. So the ambient groundwater there is actually of a poor quality as well. So when you're comparing parameters to happen with groundwater sampling, so a lot of them don't actually meet the Australian drinking water guidelines, but also the recreational guidelines as well. So it's quite a unique site, and with the groundwater and exposure, but that's one of the reasons why the licensing authority is trying to get rural landfill sites off the Swan Coastal Plain because of the porous nature of the soils, and also go down the lines of having a regional sites, large sites that can capture the volume and have leachate capture, and also manage that leachate so it can't potentially affect the ambient environment, but also the local users or sensitive ecological, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, it affects potentially the groundwater users into the future. So I hope that sort of gave you a bit of information about that. Might have gone over the top, but
no, I just needed, if I may. Yeah, I guess what are the depths of the bores?
Oh, yeah, that's one point. Yes, I could have gone into that one. Yeah.
And
yeah.
We talked about the coffee rock.
Yeah.
And in the report it talks about the coffee rock allowing ingress of water below the coffee rock as well into other water bodies. I want to know, are we capturing that?
Yeah, through the groundwater monitoring, it has identified there is balls that go through multiple water layers. Yeah. So we're getting a general from the perch water table, but also through the water table below. But they've also recommended to do further as part of the project is to do more groundwater monitoring and getting balls at different heights, so we can guarantee that that's, if it is going to be influencing the perch water table, then it's not going to potentially influence any further groundwater in greater depths below that coffee water rock. So there's further work that needs to be done into the future with this site, and with most post-closure plans and with most landfill sites, there's a lot of work that's done in regards to groundwater monitoring and reaching those different groundwater heights to make sure there's no influence on the natural water body.
All right, I'll go because it's a supplementary one anyway. So the other thing I was thinking about in relation to that, have we done a risk assessment in relation to housing and bores that are around the area that may be affected and the wetlands that are there? And in the case that there is an effect, what mitigation could we put in place?
Through Mr. Chairman, the thing is the consultants have done the work for us. They have classes of low risk as it currently is operating to the groundwater. With the closure plan and providing a capping material really limits the amount of leachate that can come through the waste profile. So we've sort of been fortunate and unfortunate through this site that we've been capping it as we've been going. That has created headaches, but it's also protected us because it's meant that a lot of the rainfall doesn't go through the waste profile, so it's minimised the leachate. But there's always the issues with old landfill sites that were unmanaged a number of years ago that we don't know what 100% is in the landfill, and what was sort of acceptable and disposed of a number of years ago could potentially affect us into the future. But from what we're doing as part of the closure plans is where we'll be doing sort of the groundwater monitoring to identify if there is any issues. But the consultants, which is GHD, have been very comfortable with the groundwater monitoring. With the nearest sensitive receptors, we're very fortunate we're positioned from residential properties. I think the closest residential property is about 500 metres away, and that is on up high. It's further away from the sites. It's actually down slope from it, so the likelihood of actually moving in that direction is very low. There is a couple of sensitive environmental areas in close proximity, but their wetland is based off a perch water table, which is on a different hydrological level, so they're not influenced. And then we've had also surface water monitoring taken in land that's adjacent, which is near farming land, which is rural, and that's also taken annually as well to determine what could be coming out on the surface near agricultural land. So we're covering most bases with our groundwater monitoring. This has been happening for over 15 years. We've been monitoring it, and we haven't been seeing anything that's dramatic. We've actually seen things quite stable. So staff are quite comfortable about where we're sitting with the site. The reporting back from the consultants have been quite comfortable. and they've sort of expected that there is the potential for contamination, but they say the potential contamination is very low. And with the closure of this site, we would believe that the leachate would be a lot less likely to affect the environment.
Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
I'm going to ask this question anyway. I read in the report that the lifespan of this tip is from 2.5 through to 4.5 years maximum, depending on the crushing. What do you think, and how will that impact you? Are you working on 4.5 years and the impact that that's going to have on our budget, or are we going to be hit with large costs, you know, earlier in the piece at the 2.5 year mark?
Through the chair, look, we've already accounted for it. We've already started to create a transfer station out there. So we're currently diverting petrol waste to Stanley Road. We've got a number of different transfer station options which have taken a large proportion of the waste out of landfill. So currently we're only really disposing of inert waste or construction demolition waste, which is of a lower risk nature and doesn't take up as much room. One of the limiting factors is that we've got a licence that is on the site, which is restricting the area where we're currently landfilling, and that's where those figures are based on. But into the future, we can apply for a licence to expand the area or consolidate the area into the future. So this is just based on what our licence is allowing us in the active fill area. So we could also, as a local government, apply for an additional licence to expand this further. But the likelihood of disposing of petrol waste, so petrol waste is the smelly stuff that normal general household waste, that's the thing that normally breaks down and can potentially create leachate and other issues and greenhouse gases as well. And that's so we'll probably look at that potentially as an option depending on what our waste streams coming into the site is. But we're very fortunate we've got a regional site within our local government that we can utilise, and that probably has made it a bit more fortunate that we can lean upon that site to be able to use it for our future waste diversion options.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Mr. Jones. 5.2.3, Clifton Road, Brunswick, proposed act on parking bay.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, put simply, we had a request some time ago, or a request was received some time ago for improved access and some sort of parking for persons with disabilities in that zone. It sort of fell off the radar at the Brunswick meeting, Place Advisory Group meeting the other night. It was raised by a long-term resident there, and I gave the resident commitment that we would progress this as quickly as possible, and hence this report to Council. It's basically similar to what Council recently approved in Gibbs Street and Harvey, which has worked really well, and we'll be proposing to do something similar there. So it'll benefit the local businesses in the area and also help assist the elderly people to access those businesses.
No questions?
He's got a close
5.3.1, proposed local development plan. Planning officer. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief introduction on this one. The land on the corner of Laura Ave and Rothstake Crescent has been recently approved for subdivision, and as part of the approvals, there is a requirement for a local development plan to be provided to council and advertised within the local community. And that local development plan basically assists and defines setbacks, retaining walls, issues for overlooking, fencing types, etc., etc. Interestingly, on this particular one, the local development plan did actually raise a number of concerns from immediate residents, and it's come about because of the process of the approvals that this particular site went through. You ordinarily get a subdivision approval, then you get your earthworks approval, and then you should actually get the local development plan and then the earthworks approval. But because of the COVID approach to development that has arisen, this particular one really fragmented and changed the way that approvals were being done. An application for subdivision isn't required to be advertised. We do think that that is sometimes not a good thing, but we're not the approving authority for that, so we can't influence that. The developer submitted an application to undertake the bulk earthworks associated with the subdivision application that they had put in. Because we're not the approving authority of the subdivision, but we are on the development approval, and we thought the change was quite substantial, we did actually refer that to immediate landowners. And that didn't really generate any additional comments, so that was fine. But it's been this local development plan that has actually triggered the need, or the comments that we've received. So, Mr. Chairman, we actually met with residents that had made a submission and some that hadn't yesterday, and we have gone through all their concerns that they have raised. Majority of them related to the actual physical construction in terms of on-site ablutions for workers, fencing, dusting, loss of vegetation. There was only one tree on the site, but that's where the footpath is going, so unfortunately it needed to go. So they themselves are now fully informed of the process that has been undertaken. We have engaged with them. They are happy with the responses that we've provided, and they regularly contact us when there's an issue out there that they want resolved, and the developer themselves is actually being very responsible in addressing some of their concerns as well. So yeah, so the local development plan itself is very simple, but this one, because we received the objections, it's coming here, and it's just highlighted the process that we've gone through. Mr. Hall. Questions? Councillor Dickinson first.
I noted that in the strategic framework, the objective number 2 is we have a balanced respect for our natural assets and built environment. It seems to be that there's quite a few blocks along the Old Coast Road that are being subdivided into smaller lots, and there's going to be no natural vegetation. So we're just going to potentially have a row of buildings. Are we going to actually look at having some trees or vegetation planted to actually break it and make it a more balanced natural asset outlook?
Through Mr. Chairman, the current terminology is business as usual, which is what we're trying to break the mould of. At the moment, the way that some of the planning framework is geared and the approvals process, there is an expectation of providing for a level block so that project builders can build a nice little home that makes it very easy. Over the last couple of years, that has resulted in exactly what you're saying, and it's raised a major concern within my team and other local authorities, and we're looking at actually getting that planning framework for down here changed. We are also having a look at that South Australind area where most of the infill development is occurring, and the current policy associated with the infill development there needs refreshing and needs to be brought up to a more acceptable level when it comes to vegetation protection and just the level of amenity along Old Coast Road as well. Surprisingly, the Department of Planning is very much on a similar page and has offered to engage with us in redeveloping that policy. So yeah, hopefully we'll start to see a completely different style of urban development through that area.
Yeah, Mr. Hall, I think you answered my first question that I submitted about the explanation as to why the correspondents that are in the report weren't aware, so I'll skip that one now, thank you for that. But just following on from Councillor Dickinson, looking at the small locality plan you've got in the top left-hand side there of the plan on page 278, is this development going to alter the character of that end of Australind? You refer to it as South Australind. Very small blocks, quite a lot of houses in one small place.
Let's not have the discussion of small blocks. Look, you'll actually notice that these particular blocks are actually rather sizable. Therefore, they are very similar to Kingston and Treendale size lots, probably more so Treendale, in the sort of the mid 500s to early 600s in some of them. So they are a standard residential lot of current standards. So that in a way is not going to really change Laura Avenue. There are larger lots along Laura Avenue, but they have actually started to be redeveloped for units in there as well. So it's not a rapid change, it's a change it's a current trend, so it's an ongoing trend in there. The ones along Malloy Lane, they are smaller in nature, but they are one of probably 1, 2, 3, 4 developments in that area that are going along this size style of lot. So no, it's not a rapid change to the amenity of the area, but it is a trend that's occurring through there, and we want to try and manage it quite better than what we're doing. Well, not better than what we're doing, better than what the development standards allow it to occur.
I understand the sizing of the lots in the new modern Treendales and Kingstons, but I guess you really have said it in a roundabout way, yes, the character of South Australia is changing.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And sorry, the reason for that is that they are large lots. They were some of the larger the lots that were developed initially when Australind was first developed, but they've within the last 5 years had sewer put in. So the introduction of sewer has allowed for the development potential for that to be expanded. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I thought it was interesting the question earlier put about trees along the Old Coast Road, and how would council manage the conflict of interest between planting trees in people's visual outlook? I noticed in the report you were talking about living areas at the front of the property so they could actually have a view, and if we're going to put trees there, is that will sort of take that view away slightly? And I know, like, how would we manage that conflict between people who want the view and the people who want the trees?
Through Mr. Chairman, I think that the question was not so much about are we planting trees with regard to this specific one, it's what are we protecting and how are we going to enhance it going forward. I think we would be very sensitive with regard to where we place trees, but it's a very clinical and harsh comment, but people don't purchase a view. If the Shire has a reason or a need to actually revegetate certain parts of its foreshore for a wide variety of reasons, those reasons are quite valid. Then if that happens to reduce someone's current view, then that's something that we would take into account. But the need for the vegetation planting in the first place would be the high priority.
Thank you.
Further? 5.3.2, small business friendly local. Cool. Oh. Carry on, sorry.
This agenda item is considering our request to apply to be a small business friendly local government, as we presented at the concept forum last month, in answer to councillor questions regarding the definition of a small business. This falls under the Small Business Corporation Act of 1983, which defines a small business as a business undertaking which is A, wholly owned and operated by an individual or individual persons in partnership or by a proprietary company within the meaning of the Corporations Act 2001 of the Commonwealth, which A, has a relatively small share of the market in which it competes, or B, is managed personally by the owner or owners or directors as the case requires, and 3, is not a subsidiary or does not form a part of a larger business or enterprise. It also has a Part B, which is declared by the Governor by order by Council pursuant in subsection 2 to be a small business for the purpose of this Act.
Easy enough to understand.
So, yes, basically we fall under the definition of the Corporations Act because they controlled and run the small business friendly program, and it is really looking at small businesses that don't compete in the market and franchises and things like that.
I had the same question. That wasn't mine, but I had the same. Oh, no, I thought you put your hand up. Councillor Beaches.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. Thanks very much for providing that. That was my question. But I thought it had something to do with actual physical numbers of people working there, and somewhere I've read in this report, and I can't find it, the majority of small businesses we're talking about have 20 or less employees. So it doesn't actually quite fit that to a large extent, so how do they connect? If I could find the little thing in here.
No, you are correct through the chair. It does talk about 20 or less employees. How do you feel that doesn't support the Act?
Well, it's owned and operated individually by a person or an individual. The person's in a partnership.
I can get further clarification
No, that's fine.
for that, but it's saying it can be owned, but they can still employ. So it's not saying it's got a group of shareholders owning it. That
Sure.
it is owned individually, but they can employ up to 20 employees.
I think was that not just part of statistics of like the percentage of
Yeah.
businesses that are small business and the number of employees that are employed by that? I think that was just part of statistics. It wasn't quoting any.
To be honest, I feel they keep it quite fluid in terms of what's the classification of a small business.
As I'm aware, there's a couple of, sorry for interrupting, Mr. Chair, that I am aware of a couple of businesses up in the Harvey industrial area, for example, that would fall under the 20, but they are quite large businesses. That, they turn over quite large sums of money in the products that they produce. So, yeah, just getting that balance right. I mean, I love the intent. It's great. It's just, we direct what we're doing to the right people, I guess.
Any further questions?
Can I just sort of probably provide some clarification? I don't think we're actually going to, sorry.
I was just going to ask about home businesses. Are they included in this? Home businesses?
Yes, they are.
Yes.
They are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I don't think we would exclude anyone because they didn't meet a statutory definition of being small, large, medium, home-based or whatever. This is basically an acknowledgement from the administration that we're here to engage and we want to make sure you guys have an easier path and really we're doing a lot of it anyway. We just are going through this process to get the public accolade or the acknowledgement that that's what we're doing, and we're here to help. So yeah, I wouldn't be hung up on 20, 21 people or turnover or anything like that. Sorry.
Totally agree.
Any further? Thank you. Financial statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So reporting at this time of the year, being the end of January, the finances, and maybe I can go to page 292 of the attachments. So we're looking at 58% of the year, and looking straight on that first document there, the statement of financial performance, you can see that income, 36 million, where 58% would be 25 million, so income is over. Expenses, 58% is 29 million, we're showing 24 million. So expenses are down, and I know we keep talking about how income's up, expenses are down, and we reflect that in the graphs. But I think sometimes it's good to actually see the different areas that are actually up or down. There was an area over the page I just wanted to highlight. The third item down, which is our rates debtors. So currently we're showing $3 million in outstanding rates. But just to highlight that the fourth instalment is due on the 2nd of April, and that we would anticipate between now and the end of the financial year of receiving about an additional $2.8 million. So pretty happy with where that is at. The one underneath it, we don't talk a lot about our sundry debtors much other than the graphs that we show out on page 300. But of the sundry debtors that we show there, that 458,000, 402 of that belongs to Alcoa, Main Roads and DFIS. And so in 3 invoices, that's pretty much the bulk of all of those. And I guess also to highlight, as you would see in the graph on page 300, that $2,300 is the only amount that we have outstanding, and that's 60 days and above. Probably the only other area that I wanted to highlight, well actually probably two areas, Mr Chair. On page 301, don't normally draw much attention to the current account coverage because most months we see that the budgeted current account or the surplus is higher than the actual. Last month, the period ending December, we were 587,000 above that budgeted period, and this month, end of January, we're 1.2 million. So it's good as we lead into that downstretch towards the end of the financial year that we are likely to have some surplus funds there. So it just gives a little bit of a picture, and thought I'd just explain that a little bit. On page 302, Mr Chair, just the last one there is that our investments are within policy, that our exposure risks are all acceptable in accordance with the policy, and as we're showing there, 35% of our funds are with Commonwealth Bank and then going down below those. So nothing untoward and nothing really standing out there.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Any questions? Pass. Good. Move on. 542, listing of accounts paid.
Thank you, Mr Chair. So we've got $3.26 million worth of payments. There were a couple of accounts that were queried by Councillor Beach, so I might go straight to those. EFT 53464 on page 308. So the question was, is this a new vehicle or a trade-in? That vehicle is the Director of Corporate Services vehicle, and so that was the replacement of my vehicle. The next one was on page 311, EFT 53589 for 3,926, and the question was bullet camera. What's the bullet camera used for? And that bullet camera forms part of the CCTV that my staff have acquired as far as the Ridley Place installation there. And the third one highlighted was on page 313, EFT 53678 for $1,395. And the question was, has the Shire taken over responsibility for the Harvey pool kiosk? And the answer is yes, we have. I'm not sure if there's any other questions, Mr Chair.
Thank you.
Appears not. No further questions? Excellent. 5.4.3. What have we got there? Oh, wait. It's for you, Steve. Is that practical enough? That was you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chair. So we've had an application from the Southern Aboriginal Corporation for a rates exemption on one of the properties that they own. So the use of this property is a long-term lease for an Aboriginal family, and the way that they manage it is they charge 25% of the household income or 75% of the market value as rent for those living there. So they already have two other properties that they own that the council has provided rates exemption for, so this will be the third. And this application really is deemed to fit with the current definitions of charitable purpose. So as such, we're recommending that council approve the rates exemption. As it's already over halfway through the year, we're promoting to council to provide that exemption from the 21-22 year. And Mr Chair, if I could maybe in the recommendation make that, there's a typo there, should actually read 2021-2022. And thank you to Councillor Campbell for picking that up.
Any questions? Yes, because they're asking for this. This is a new purchase that they've made, or is that unaware?
I'm unaware as to when they acquired it. If they have had it for a while, we would only consider rates exemption from the point that it's being used for that purpose. So as soon as they put someone in there or rent it out for that purpose, then we would consider it. So I'm assuming it's a new acquisition.
Okay. Mr. Beach?
Mr. Winter, do they have to apply each year for this exemption, or is it ongoing until you get notified it's not being used for charitable purposes?
Yeah, thank you through Mr. Chair. We used to do that at council. We would require anyone that was having a rates exemption to apply annually. We've gone away from that process maybe 5 years ago, and now as part 2 of the recommendation, we actually now change the rate book that property is now not rateable, which fits better with the Act and the requirements for rating. And so the requirement is then, if they change the purpose, then they're to notify us, or if we see a change of ownership come through for that property, we then automatically make that change. It just saves some of that administrative work.
Any further? Yes,
Just if there's any questions.
so, notice of motion for following meetings. Any questions on that? Right. Matters behind closed doors, nil. Dull old meeting, 5:20. I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you all for your attendance and for putting up with me.